Hello everyone, and welcome back to Autonomia, the show where we bring ideas from the libertarian left to everyday people, and foster conversation on what we believe in hopes of proving that we all have far more in common than we are trained to believe. My name is Hayward, and I am your host. As always, our intro and outro music come from a song called A Bigger Cage is Still a Prison by System Failure. If you'd like to look up this song, the band spells System, C-I-S-T-E-M, for political reasons.
There's nothing I want more than to sleep under the night sky, hear the animals as they go about their lives, feel the fire warm my body, feel the mud under my toes, but tonight this cell keeps me enclosed.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for tuning back in. I know it's been really quite some time, probably close to a year now, and maybe part of my absence is because I got a cell phone number a while ago, and that made calling into the radio a much more frequent thing for me, and maybe it reduced the necessity of getting regular audio content out there because I could just borrow the airwaves of the most popular talk show in Connecticut. So, why chat into my own comparatively insignificant program? But I think maybe we could still breathe in a little bit of life into this project. So I've still been part of the radio station. I've still been very upfront about my politics, my beliefs, talking more about different history that's been hidden from you by the establishment, about different perspectives that the corporate media doesn't really like to tell you about, or if they will acknowledge their existence, will flagrantly misrepresent them to their benefit and, from my perspective, your detriment. And that mission remains for me. I've always been very upfront about what I believe, and I think that's important. I think authenticity is the basis of trust, and you can't build connections without trust. And in the pursuit of trying to build those bridges across the no man's land of the partisan divide, in those pursuits of trying to find common ground together and maybe change some minds if people feel so inclined, I've entered the King of Callers competition for 94.9 News Now. And in round 2, I was jumped into round 2 because I'm such a frequent caller. Lee was willing to honor a lot of the frequent callers by basically giving them a bit of a head start. And so my rant is what they call them, my rant played, and I did a lot of self-promotion. I was very careful to check with Lee ahead of time and say, hey, is this like a local-only thing, or are we able to do some self-promotion more broadly? What is and isn't considered fair? I don't want to screw things up here. And he said, promote yourself like a madman. And I will admit, I didn't quite do that. But I did reach out to the internet more broadly and try to cultivate some support. I think this not only was within the rules, which Lee and everyone else that knows the situation has acknowledged, but I think it's well within what could be considered fair, because I am an extreme minority opinion on the station, at least in terms of how I identify. And so if the competition was to be even remotely competitive, it seemed well within what would be acceptable. And so I talked about a few things on there. I talked about how I spent many years in conservative talk radio as an open leftist, and I discussed with a lot of folks what my motivations in doing this project were, of saying I used to be a right-wing person, and what brought me out of it was a mixture of confronting the hypocrisies of the right, or at least what I saw as hypocrisies among the right, when I was raised to believe in limited government and freedom and skepticism of power. I was taught that that's what it meant to be a patriot, to be an American. And when I saw the conservatives, genuflecting at the altar of power and seemingly worshiping it, making an idol out of the nation, that to me didn't fit. It didn't fit with the spirit that I understood to be a patriotic spirit. To me, it was always much more of a rebelliousness, a willingness to stand up to authority, not to worship it. And so I want to talk to people that are where I was and provide them with additional information and perspectives that most people within that infosphere never encounter. And I've always been very upfront about that. And I described that on several of these pages in somewhat academic terms, but maybe those terms, if people aren't familiar with them, can sound quite bad. Talking about, for example, disrupting the homogeneity of the right-wing infosphere. I think that's important, and I don't think disrupting is a dirty word. Disrupting something that is relatively homogenous, mind you, on a show that is willing to accept those opinions. I found a space within that much more homogenous media ecosystem that is willing and brave enough to put out those other perspectives. And so I've been doing that. And part of what the goal is in this, in addition to saying, hey, maybe you believe more of what I believe, maybe you're more my thing. That's the marketplace of ideas, which I thought was what we're for. But also disrupting this thing that we call the fascist pipeline. And this seemingly was misinterpreted as calling the audience fascist, calling my friend fascist. And that's not the case. I can understand why that perspective and why that reading exists. But let me go ahead and do what I can to clear that up. The fascist pipeline refers to what happens in a massive, modern, media-driven ecosystem where things like algorithms come into play, where you start listening to a bunch of things that might be, well within the norm. And I view Lee's show as well within the norm of general American political discussion. But when you bring in things like internet and algorithms into it, you start to run the risk of going into these rabbit holes, and pretty soon you can end up in Alex Jones territory. And I will say it here. Lee has said he's not a huge fan of Alex Jones, especially with all of us being from Connecticut and his whole little entanglement with defamation and harassment and a lot of other things. Alex Jones is not well liked here. But I will say that you can get down those rabbit holes when the media and the internet is just feeding you more and more things to drive more engagement and drive more clicks. It's what you call a radicalization spiral, or specifically in the context of the right, the fascist pipeline. And so by talking and bringing different perspectives from different people on a show like Lee's show, you are disrupting the fascist pipeline. You are creating a space where you can humanize the other side, where you are less vulnerable to saying, oh, I'm going to start to believe much more extreme things that are not on Lee's show, but are part of that broader ecosystem. You're creating a space that can help resist that trend and keep folks in, from my perspective, what is more sane territory. That, to me, is a noble, laudable, righteous goal and project. But, maybe if you're not a bunch of stuff-shirted nerds talking in academic terms, then maybe that can be misread. And that's a sloppiness on my part. And it's caused quite a blowback in a lot of ways, really. But social media, especially on Facebook, has been ablaze with some not so nice descriptions of me, frankly. We have one here. Guys, we all hate people who hate cops. Well, there's a sociopath, Hayward Gatch, who is trying to rig a contest so he can spread his hate of the police on the radio. He's pretending to be one of us, but was recently caught saying otherwise. Please vote for Mike Costanza in this radio competition so we can show the other guy that nobody wants to hear what he has to say. All right, so in that post, I talked about being critical of capitalism, of policing, of a lot of things in society that I think deserve critique. Does that mean I hate cops? Do we have no capacity for nuance? I don't hate people just because of their job. I don't hate people because of the color of their skin or where they're from or the languages they speak or their criminal background or any number of variables through which you could just hate a person by default. I don't. I am critical of policing because I think it makes sense to be critical of government. And at the end of the day, police are a wing of the government. You should critique and you should scrutinize the wings of the government, but not among these neo-loyalists who still seem to think they're patriots. I don't hate police. I've talked to police officers when, for example, they come to our giveaways and ask, hey, what are we doing? I tell them what we're about. I give them my card. I'm a public figure at this point, so I'm, able to maybe be a little less secretive about my identity and all of that because that cat's already out of the bag. But I'm going to talk to these people like humans. With that said, I'm not ignorant to the fact that they have the power to throw me in a cage if they see fit. So I'm not going to trust these people. That doesn't mean I hate them. They're just people doing a thing. To hate it can be so poisonous. It's not good for you. I don't hate police. I am deeply skeptical of the institution of policing and how it's used as a repressive mechanism against any sort of social change. Look at your history if you don't know what I'm talking about. They don't teach it in schools, but it's still history. So then it goes to the other complaints she's had about me, like saying that I'm trying to rig a contest. I'm using the rules of a contest, promoting myself in a contest. So I'm not trying to rig anything. I'm trying to build a base of support like everyone else in this competition is doing. That's what you do, and that's okay. And he says that I'm trying to spread my hate of police on the radio. I don't know if this person doesn't realize that Lee's show is a call-in show. People call in and talk all the time. And I've called in to criticize dynamics of policing, but I've never once said I hate them, because I don't. I think it's just these people want to see the world in these simple binaries because I don't know if they're not able or maybe just not willing to hold complex and nuanced thought. This person says I'm pretending to be one of them, but was recently caught saying otherwise. Clearly, this person has not paid attention to my presence on the show over the past 5 years. I've always been extremely upfront about who I am. And the rant for this competition literally opens with Lee saying I'm a card-carrying Levitic government anarchist. It's not a secret. I make no secrets about it because I think that authenticity is important. And they say nobody wants to hear what I have to say. Well, certainly some folks do. Maybe they don't. And maybe if they had a little more intellectual courage, we could actually have a conversation and find out, hey, maybe we have more common ground than you think. Anyway, I'll be messaging all of these folks, and I'm pretty friendly, so I'm not about to, be any sort of a problem. I'll just say, hey, I saw what you posted. Do you want to talk about it? Do you want to actually hear what I really believe? Because it's clear you have no idea. We'll see what happens with that. We have another one over here. So I have a favor to ask. There's this competition for our local radio station, and one of the guys in the competition, Hayward Gatch, is a fraud. He's a loser who's been pretending to be someone else he's not for years. Why? He's a sociopath. He's rigging this competition. Please click the link and vote for my friend, Michael Costanza, so we can show this Gatch loser that nobody wants to hear his communist mumbo-jumbo. Well, we've touched on many times the fact that I am not a communist. I am an anarchist. There is a difference that most people on the right have no idea about because their media likes to tell them that everything to the right of Reagan is basically Mao. Anyway, episode 2 of this podcast talks quite a bit about political nuance and the political spectrum, and a knowledge of that is pretty important when trying to have conversations with people, because when you just label folks, that person's a fascist, that folk's a communist, it dumbs down the conversation. And let's see if these folks are actually willing to have an intelligent conversation. Maybe they are. Or maybe they just lack the courage to talk to someone, but they certainly are willing to talk about someone. They say I'm a fraud. We've already covered that. I'll actually be posting, attached to this episode, an appearance of mine on the Lee Elsey Show going back to 2020, where I am very open about my beliefs, and I talk about anarchist and anti-fascist street tactics. I talk about organizing styles. I give what I view and still view as a pretty unvarnished academic view of these groups. I don't really talk about what is good or bad, what I support and don't support. Full disclosure, I don't support the random assaulting of people, but I'm trying to give people that have no understanding of these communities some understanding of them, so at the very least they can have the information to know what they're talking about. He says I'm a sociopath. I mean, I'd be amazed if that person even knows what that word means, and then urges folks to vote for Michael Costanza. I don't think there's any underlying connection as to why several of these people are all saying to vote for Mike Costanza. At the time, he was by far in the lead, so that's probably why. I don't think there's any sort of conspiracy here. I don't see it that way. But that's what we've got. Here's another one. As of 7:45, Michael Costanza is in the lead with 1,379 votes. He is battling Hayward and Trevor for a 1-hour spot on 94.9, courtesy of the Lee Elsey Show. Contestants with the 2 highest votes by 9 a.m. today will advance to the final round of Mohegan Sun, November 17th, where they will battle out for the final spot. Hayward is trying to sabotage the contest. He's a proud Antifa boy from North Stonington that has openly said he is attempting to win conservatives' talk show contest to spew his toxic rhetoric, which includes violence against our police and call for disorder and anarchy. No. Vote for a local 6th grade teacher that stood behind parents and teachers during the COVID-19 lockdowns. Vote here for 1 more hour. Yeah, so not trying to sabotage things. I was trying to win a competition using the rules of the competition, because I've been hoping for this sort of an opportunity for the better part of 5 years now. And it's here. I'm going to do what I can to win a competition. I'm going to do it by the rules. I'm not here to cheat. I'm not here to cause any problems. But I am trying to win a competition. I'm not sabotaging anything. Proud Antifa boy? I mean, I guess, I am an anti-fascist. I think that should be the default for most people. That to me makes a lot of sense. Maybe you feel otherwise. Maybe you feel like being anti-fascist is not a good thing. I don't know. Maybe you should do some introspection about that. And he says I'm attempting to win this conservative talk show so I can spew my toxic rhetoric. Well, I mean, hey, you're entitled to that opinion. But if you knew anything about the rhetoric that I talk about on a normal basis, it's pretty much just bringing information to the table that most people don't have, or talking about history. I bring my opinions into it, and I make it clear when I'm speaking my opinions, but hey, if that's toxic to you, I mean, I guess go listen to Sean Hannity. You can get your confirmation bias all day long. And, this person's saying I'm calling for violence against the police and disorder and anarchy. Well, hey, I'm an anarchist, so yeah, some variation of that I would like. I would like a world in which the organizational system that I prefer is possible and not criminalized by a massive top-down bureaucracy run by corrupt oligarchs. Yeah, I'd like that. But I think this person has a very different idea of what anarchism means. And as far as calling for violence against the police, I mean, the police exist as a social role to enforce state power. And their role, by its very nature, is a violent role. And that's unfortunate, and it sucks. But, when you have a situation like the American Revolution, for example, where you are trying to fight for freedom, the people that choose to stand with the government are going to end up in that conflict. And if they make that choice, to me, that is a mutually agreed upon fight. It's a mutually agreed upon conflict. There have been instances in history where police have set down their shields and set down their clubs and their tear gas and their guns and went home when the people were protesting. But there were a lot of other instances where they just sided with the government. And what does that mean? Well, that means that this is a force doing their job. Does it make them evil? No. Does it make them inherently the worst people? Does it make them worthy of hate? For me, at least, also no. But I want a peaceful change as much as humanly possible. But the tricky thing is, when we try to do things peacefully, the government usually uses its primary tool, violence, to get what it wants. So, you often have to ask yourself, who is violent first? Who is defining the territory of this conflict? Is it the people trying to create a better world? Or is it the people that are obeying the ruling class's orders to keep the world that most people find intolerable happening? Is that anti-police rhetoric? Maybe. To me, it's pro-freedom rhetoric, and if the police want to be pro-freedom, they certainly can be. But time will tell if that'll ever happen. Another thing that I found, and I actually hope to have this person on about this, a friend of mine, and I say that genuinely, a friend of mine who is the chair of a Republican town committee was telling people to vote for me because this person values diversity of opinion. And this person knows my politics. And this person was getting harassed by a lot of people on the right in the same way I have been, saying, do you know this person? This person is anti-police. This person is an anarchist. This person is evil. And my friend is like, I know exactly who this person is. And I value diversity of thought. And, I disagree with this person sometimes, but I can tell this person cares. And yeah, if we disagree, that happens. We're people. But if we at least come to the table with care, that to me is a great step one. Maybe other people prefer conflict and vitriol over good faith collaboration and discussion. Anyway, so I'm going to roll now the appearance of mine on the Lee Elsey show from the 2nd of June of 2020. And just for any of you out there that think that I am a fraud or that I've been misrepresenting myself, have a little listen at this and see if you still feel that way by the end of it. And hey, maybe, just maybe, talk to me. I'm a public figure. I'm not that hard to reach. I'm here. Anything you could say to me, I promise you I've had worse said to me. And some of those people that have said worse to me, I'm friends with now. We'll see what happens. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you find this. This legacy recording insightful and illuminating as to my character throughout the course of these past few years. Thank you so much.
You don't scare me. Work on it.
All right, so it's 6 after the hour of 9 o'clock, so we're going to grab one of our social media mavericks who's been on with us before. He's actually been on a couple times on this show, been on a couple of weekend shows. And I'm trying to get an inside look as to what makes these protests that turn into riots tick. And our friend Hayward Gatch is joining us. Hayward, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing okay, Lee. I'm pretty happy I live in the woods right now. And I actually had a little more time to consider that question you asked me yesterday as far as introducing myself goes. And if you don't mind, I can answer that in a bit more detail for you.
Of course. Go ahead.
All right. Well, many of you listening have been trained to hate me, but I don't hate you. Many of you have seen terrible things that people claiming to be like me have done. And many of you have believed lies about people like me. After all, it is the disinformation age. I don't beat up old people. I don't demonize everyone in a red hat. I have friends on the right. I don't shout down anyone who has views that are different than mine. I don't glorify or fetishize violence. And it is not my first resort. I don't worship Satan, and George Soros doesn't pay me to dress up in black and show up at protests. I am a devoted husband and a loving father to my daughter, and will be, God willing, the same for my second daughter when she comes this fall. I am an activist, a volunteer aid worker, a homesteader, a handyman, and an anarchist. I love my family, I love my community, and I love this world and its few remaining thriving ecosystems. I long for a world where freedom can truly ring, where people are free to pursue their interests and passions so long as they don't infringe on the freedom of others. I dream of a world where everything we do isn't monitored, commodified, and policed. I dream of a world where brutal state violence isn't lurking just beneath the surface, ready to crush any threat to their domination. I dream of a world that I don't have to apologize for my children for. And for all of those reasons and more, I am an anti-fascist, and I hope you are too. With that said, Lee, I am very happy to answer any questions you have, and I'm very grateful that you were willing to squeeze me in today.
All right, so I had a conversation with actually one of the higher-ups here at the radio station yesterday and asked me the question of what an anarchist is in relation to sort of what a Black Lives Matter person would be or an Antifa person would be. Could you sort of spin that all together and do a quick once-over?
Well, I can certainly try for you, Lee. So anarchism is a political ideology that goes back literally centuries, and they initially split from other parties on the left, including the Marxists, because they had a disagreement on the nature of the state. I'm simplifying here, but the Marxists in general believed that the power of the state could be leveraged to create an egalitarian society. The anarchists believed that the state was an inherent evil and could not be simply turned around in its character to suddenly give up all of the power it had accumulated in the previous 10,000 years of civilization. Black Lives Matter became a rallying cry after the shooting of Mike Brown. Eventually, that became a hashtag that we saw all over social media, and eventually that became a nonprofit organization, and I'm pretty sure it was founded by a guy named DeRay McKesson. It has chapters all over the country, and it is in some way, shape, or form an organization. Those folks have independent chapters, and anyone can use that hashtag because of the sheer nature of social media. And anyone can make a Twitter account. And that segues pretty well into Antifa, because being in this disinformation age and being how dangerous social media can be, anyone can make these hashtags and anyone can jump in and create anything, which makes them incredibly vulnerable to infiltration. It makes them incredibly vulnerable to anyone that might not have a thorough grounding in theory or practice or ethics or morals or anything, to just say, I believe this and I'm doing this for this reason. And that's super dangerous, and it's led to a really, really convoluted political landscape. Like I alluded to yesterday, I've known the term anti-fascist for a very, very long time, and it means something to me. And that really did start to change quite a lot in 2015 and 16. And to me, my personal opinion, I think because a lot of people, especially from just the petering out of Occupy, felt absolutely hopeless and really, really desperate to do something. And that craziness we saw in that time was something. And a lot of what I saw was targeting of random people that I can have conversations with and find common ground with, and I think that's a whole lot more productive. And as I said on Chet's show, there are people in this world that have terrible beliefs, and there is a time and a place to fight. But that time and a place isn't all the time. And those evil people are not everyone. I think it's extremely corrosive to our community cohesion to just immediately blanket assume that everyone on your end of the political aisle is evil. Because like you and I have had conversations countless times, and I don't think we've ever fought, and we have different political beliefs. Anti-fascism goes back to the original roots of fascism in 1930s Germany. They were originally founded as sort of the militant counterpoint to the brown shirts. So they fought in very physical ways against these folks because at the time in Germany and all over the world, most political parties had a militant wing to them. So they were the people that fought the brown shirts when they were trying to attack folks all over the place. That legacy continued all throughout the 20th century. And the 1980s in Germany, when they started to have a resurgence of neo-fascism, is when you started to see that tactic that now all of you recognize called the black bloc tactic. That's where everyone dresses up in black, where you homogenize yourself. And we all know why. It makes it harder to individually prosecute people, makes it easier to get away with militant action. And when they had the J20 protest in D.C., 200-something people got mass arrested, and every single one of them got let off because it's hard to pin charges on those people.
Is it safe to say that the Antifa that we see on TV every single night, the guys that are in black, are all part of that organization?
Well, see, that's the tricky thing about it. It's not an organization in the conventional sense. It's a set of tactics motivated by an underlying ideology.
There's got to be somebody, though, at these locations, Hayward, that's running the show.
Running the show is a little bit different than an official organization. What you have, especially among anarchists, are these things you call affinity groups. So those are a group of anywhere between, it can be as little as 2 or 3 people or 20 people. And they might organize among themselves, but it's not a centralized organization. And if you want to compare it to a different militant organization, the Panthers might be a good example. They were an organization that had a chairperson, they had regional heads of everything. And for that reason, it was very easy for the government to target those specific leaders and go after them. You might remember from your history that the Black Panthers were more in the Maoist tradition, so that's kind of on the communist side of things. Anarchists don't usually work that way because the very nature of the word is to oppose hierarchy. It believes in horizontal organizing. So you're going to see local groups of people self-organizing along a set line of principles, and that means it's much harder to tamp this thing down. But also, it has a major weakness in that it's very easy for anyone out there to say they're claiming they're going to do it in the name of this without having any underpinning in any of the theory or practice behind it, or even the history behind it. It's a really complicated situation.
Are you? I say you. I shouldn't say that. Are they using a Black Lives Matter sort of mantra? Are they hiding behind that and using this narrative to further this cause in this case?
Well, I'm not so sure that they're hiding. I mean, it does seem quite out open in the streets. But I think the spirit of your question is, are they hijacking this narrative to push their own agenda? Is that what you're asking, more or less?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's important to note that there's a tremendous amount of overlap between these, we'll call them organizations for the sake of conversation, but there's a tremendous amount of overlap between these organizations and causes. You see a lot of folks that organize under the slogan of Black Lives Matter having some very militant viewpoints and being very against the very existence of policing. And those are the kind of things that are compatible with anarchist ideology as well. When I was on the ground observing what was happening in Oakland, California during the second wave of the Ferguson Rebellion, I saw a lot of people masked up in all black, and I saw a lot of folks, just average people in the city cooperating together because they had a similar viewpoint and they had a similar amount of rage. And interestingly enough, it was probably about day 10 of the unrest there. A lot of people in the crowd wanted to remain peaceful instead, and the more militant folks were ejected from the crowd. And that night, everyone that was there was mass arrested, brutalized, pepper sprayed, tear gassed, flashbang grenades, rubber bullets, the whole shebang, because they didn't have protection anymore, because they didn't have something that could keep the police at bay. And that's something you can feel any way that you want to morally. Of course, that's your prerogative. But tactically speaking, militant demonstrations almost always are handled with kid gloves rather than ones that can be absolutely squashed or ignored. And that's why you see these things becoming more and more common. Because no matter how you feel about what happened in Ferguson or Mike Brown or anything, if we're going to be historians about this, the reason that body cams were popularized all over the country and the reason that civilian review boards became popular all over the country is because they saw what happened when you ignore people years after years after years after years. And now we've seen body cams being shut off. We've seen civilian review boards having non-binding authority. And you have that anger bubbling up again. And we're seeing it again because nothing has fundamentally changed. They've thrown us a bone, but we've seen that that doesn't really change the underlying behavior. In Louisville, just the other night, the police shut off their body cams and opened up on the crowd with live fire and killed a homeless person who actually gave hot dogs to the police for free. He was a small businessman that just happened to be in the area. It's scary.
Well, let me ask you this, because it's going to end up moving forward. You know this. You see it coming. It's going to end up. It's going to come to a pinnacle point somewhere along the line, and they've got military folks on the ground. I think I saw last night 70,000, I guess, troops across the entire country are placed in different spots. So eventually, if the burning continues and the looting continues and the attacks continue, I mean, is there any concern that the military is going to go forward full out and begin to combat violence with actual violence? Do they think about that, or is that even a consideration?
It is absolutely a thought, and it is absolutely a concern. And this goes back to our Civil War episode, which I encourage anyone to go back in the stream and find it. This is very, very similar to what happened in Syria and all over the Arab Spring. It was protesting turned into rioting turned to repression, and that repression bred an unbelievable backlash that spiraled in some cases into horrible civil wars. And that's something we have to be very careful about. And this is what I was talking about this morning. Trump is in a no-win situation right now. I do not envy this guy in the slightest. If he does nothing and allows this to continue, he is going to have a serious loss of support. People are going to see him as weak. It's going to undermine his legitimacy. But if he just takes the opposite approach and uses full-on military force, he's playing a very dangerous game, because a lot of people, especially in this country, they might have sympathies toward these protesters, and they have guns too. And there's a lot of terrorism that might end up happening in this country if warfare ends up happening. We have this discussion around mass shootings where they say they can't go for the big targets, so they go for the soft targets. They go for the gun-free zone. If you have a military situation going on right now where they become unassailable, but there's still all of this unaddressed rage, that is probably going to spill out into other parts of the community, and it's going to get worse. And that is a horrifying prospect for anyone listening to this, myself included. The third option he has is to go along with what history has done. And every time sufficient unrest has taken place, government looks to make concessions. And that brings us into a bit of the strategy that underlines a lot of militant organizing. A lot of anarchists believe it is not wise to make demands when pushing the state in an extreme way. And the reason for that is because you show your hand. You show them what you will accept in order to go home. Anyone that's been in business for a while knows that you don't make the first offer in a negotiation. And you can kind of get an idea of the strategy they're working with here. They're saying, you tell me what you're going to do to get me out of the street. And that's worked all over the world for a long time. But the dangerous thing there is we don't necessarily know what all these people want. There is no cohesive demand. Right now it's a lot of rage. There are some people that are making demands, but as far as a movement, and this is also because they're so decentralized, there's not even a mechanism for formulating those demands.
It's a rage against what, though? It's not a rage against racism. That's been hijacked, like we had already talked about. The rage is what, against a centralized government?
Well, for an anarchist, you could certainly make that a point. However, it's a rage against so many unaddressed grievances. You could say it's racism, but it's also the conduct of police that has been unaddressed for a very long time. And there are people that support police and there are people that don't. But a lot of folks out there are becoming very, very impatient at seeing all of these, to us, very obvious abuses of justice that almost never go unpunished. And not only that, continue to happen. And you are having people feeling completely unheard. You are having people feel completely directionless with nothing they can do to change anything. And that almost always ends up in violence happening.
All right, let me ask you this, and I know you already said this in the beginning that you don't condone any of this, but within the sort of hierarchy of each town, each group, each city where these folks are causing and wreaking havoc, what's the conversation? They must talk amongst each other. I mean, what's the feeling when one of these kids knocks or sucker punches or hits somebody in the head with a brick? Like, for example, I'll give you the old guy holding the flag, walking down the middle of the road, the American flag, getting hit. What's the reasoning behind that? And then what's the sort of, is it a celebration that happens afterwards, that they're all happy that they, like a bunch of jackals, they converged on an old man and beat the hell out of him and took his flag and burned it and then beat anybody who tried to sort of protect him? What's the mindset of that?
I can only speak for the people that I know, Lee. But anyone that has a more thorough grounding in the principles of movements like this, that kind of stuff is not productive. It doesn't further the cause of trying to spread ideas like we can self-organize, we can have liberty, we can find common ground and find ways to have a better society together. There are people out there, as there always will, that will act in rage, and that's very counterproductive in my opinion. I am sure there are groups out there that are very happy about things like this happening. Because we live in a country of, 380 million people? There are people on radical sides of every ideology that want to make things worse. And I'm trying to make sure I don't sound like I'm deflecting here, but just to give context to the danger of folks on the extremes. When they had that Second Amendment rights rally in Richmond that went really well with people on all sides going there were folks on the very far extreme right that are not the kind of people that are listening to the show right now. Very, very extreme folks that were going to go there, set off bombs, fire into the crowd to create a chaotic situation. And that is exactly what they were trying to do, to spark a war. And there are minorities of those people in every group. And it's incumbent upon us, in my opinion, to try to find out those folks and get them out of there, because that is going to seriously cause problems and not further any cause that I'm interested in furthering.
All right, one more for me because I'm running out of time, Hayward. And we're talking to Hayward Gatch, and I appreciate him giving a little insight on some of the stuff that happens on the ground. So how does this end?
There are a couple ways that it can end. This can gradually peter out, sort of like Ferguson did.
Right.
This can, I speak for a lot of people I know, hoping that this is not going to spiral and get worse like it did in Syria or in a million other places or in Ukraine. It can happen that way, and I don't think it'll happen nationwide, but it might happen in a few different areas. We've seen areas of our country where the government has lost control. And as an anarchist, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but what is happening in those places, what happens there, and what is the response by the government to reassert control in those places? And then to bring it back, what is the response of the people resisting the reimposition of that control? That goes back and forth very quickly into a circular firing squad. A lot of people could get very seriously hurt. And if you thought the economic damage from the coronavirus was bad, combine that with an unbelievable amount of civil unrest, we have no idea how bad this could go.
All right,
Go ahead,
I'm sorry.
The Trump administration could decide to make some concessions, and that may work, but it also may not. We don't know. And we also don't know what those concessions may be. Are they actual serious reforms that are going to make serious changes and undercut any rage that might fuel this in the future? We don't know that yet. And I'm a guy that tries to be pretty fair toward the people in office, even though I don't like most of them. I don't think a lot of what Trump has done, you've said this as well, has helped to serve to de-escalate the situation. When we saw what happened last night with tear gassing and rubber bulleting people that were peacefully protesting so Trump could take a selfie, that doesn't help.
No, I would agree with that, but there's got to be a line in the sand drawn somewhere, because you can't just keep letting block after block burn. Somewhere along the line.
And that shows how unbelievably complicated and difficult this situation is.
Hayward, listen, thanks for joining us today, man. I do appreciate it again, and we'll talk soon. But thank you, and stay safe, I guess, over in the woods.
Thank you for your patience.
All right, you got it. Hayward Gatch giving us an inside look. So we'll open up the phones. Let me know what you think. We'll come right back. It's 94.9 News Now.
Thank you so much for listening to today's podcast episode. This project is done on a DIY basis on extremely antiquated equipment. And if this is something you'd like to hear more of, and maybe you're feeling particularly generous, you can head on over to patreon.com/Auftonomia. That's patreon.com/AFTONOMIA. I'm still looking to figure out what kind of benefits I can offer to any of my subscribers other than my undying gratitude. But if you feel like supporting the show, it would be very helpful. I am a father of 2, husband of 1, trying to provide for my family and do whatever I can to make this world a place I don't have to apologize to those children for. I'd really appreciate any support that happens. Obviously, if you can't, I totally get it. I know how it feels to be up against the wall financially. So thank you so much for listening, and have a great day.
'Cause there's nothing I want more than to sleep under the night sky. The animals as they go about their lives. Feel the fire warm my body, feel the mud under my toes. But tonight this hell keeps me enclosed. For if we don't have our freedom, if we are captured by their iron hands, then the vision for fire, it burns so much more bright. There's no justice in the system, a bigger cage is still a prison. Well, I hope that somewhere someone breaks free tonight.